Hey, and we're back again with another one of Skeptic Skeleton Sunday streams. As you can see, this week we're going to be going over William Lane Craig, which will probably take up the entirety of the stream by itself. This is something I've always wanted to talk about because William Lane Craig is usually highly recommended to me, both in my personal and professional life, but I think it's abundantly obvious to pretty much anyone who follows me why he's not compelling. Even so, I couldn't make that into its own concise 20-ish minute video, especially considering that his video is already almost a half an hour. So, what are we doing? And to get started,
Today on the John Akerberg Show, does God exist? A recent Pew survey revealed that more than 1 in 5 Americans now consider themselves atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. And today I've asked philosopher Dr. William Lane Craig to respond by presenting 5 good reasons why God does exist. Dr. Craig is considered by many to be the top Christian philosopher of our generation.
top Christian philosopher of our generation.
Has debated many of the new atheists in some of the leading universities around the world.
But has he won, though? Has he made compelling points? Just because you're a part of the debate doesn't mean that you contributed anything worthwhile or that you actually made any substantial points, which should matter.
Dr. Craig holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Birmingham in England and also a Doctor of Theology degree from the University of Munich. Join us for this special edition of the John Akerberg Show. Welcome to our program. I'm John Akerberg. Thanks for joining us today. I'm glad that you're here and you won't want to miss this information. My guest is Dr. William Lane Craig, who's one of the finest philosophers of our time. He's engaged in debates and dialogues with many of the most well-known skeptics in our world at some of the most prestigious universities around the world. And Bill, I'm glad that you're here today. And many of your debates with leading atheists have entered on such topics as atheism versus Christianity, or does God exist, or what good evidence is there to think that God exists? And today I'd like you to share with our audience 5 good reasons why you believe God exists.
Very good. I'm convinced, John, that the hypothesis that God exists explains a wide range of the data of human experience.
I feel the need to preface this that I strongly doubt William Lane Craig understands what an explanation is, but I'll get into that a little bit later in the video.
For example, God is the best explanation of the origin of the universe.
Okay, how do you determine that? How do you conclude that God is the best explanation? He's the best explanation with regard to which other explanations? It's very easy to just say that God is the best explanation, but you actually have to prove that God is the best explanation. You cannot merely claim that he's the best explanation without explaining what the other explanations are and why this one is better than all of those.
Second, God is the best explanation of the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life.
Don't even get me started on that.
Thirdly, God is the best explanation of the existence of objective moral values and duties,
whatever that means,
in the world. Number 4, God is the best explanation for the historical facts concerning Jesus of Nazareth.
I'm not convinced that what you consider historical facts are actually historical facts, but again, let's wait till we get there.
And finally, number 5, God can be personally known and experienced.
There are, through a variety of psychedelic means, be they drug related or merely illusory in nature, there are a lot of ways that you can personally know a lot of things that aren't real, which I don't see how that makes God's existence verified any better, or the verification of God's existence any better.
Together, I think these provide a powerful cumulative case for believing that God exists.
All right.
If each one of those was good enough on their own to reach the conclusion of God, you wouldn't need the rest of them. The fact that you need the rest of them to make a cumulative case is a demonstration that none of them are good enough on their own. And it's not like these arguments fit well together. It's not like you can just stack them on top of each other, because then you'd have to make an argument for why these two arguments go well together.
I start with number one, the origin of the universe.
One of the most remarkable facts about modern physics is that, in contrast to scientists of bygone days, modern science believes that the universe is not eternal in the past, but had a beginning a finite time ago. The controlling paradigm of modern astrophysics, which is the study of the universe as a whole, is that the universe began in an event called the Big Bang about 14 billion years ago.
I actually lapsed out there for a second. In regards to this, that's a very interesting claim, but you don't really have any citations. You can say that that is the general consensus of modern physics or whatever have you, but again, entering the conversation as someone who does not already agree with you, and presuming that I have, or at least I'm trying to not have any pre-known biases towards the Big Bang, you haven't given me any good reason to believe that. You've said it, but saying it is not good enough. And that is with regard to your explanation of the Big Bang being a beginning point.
And I think that most lay people don't understand that according to this theory, not simply all matter and energy, but physical space and time themselves came into being at the moment of the Big Bang.
With regards to time and space, these are conceptual things that we have labeled. So it is harder to determine that those things came into being, because those are merely what we consider those things to be. Space, as we know it, came into being. Time, as we know it, came into being. And even then, we don't necessarily know that it came into being. We just don't know anything before there. As far as I'm aware, there was a singularity before the event of the Big Bang occurred. And within that event contained all matter, energy, space, time, and yada yada. Therefore, it would seem to me that none of these things came into being at that moment. They were already there within the singularity. Again, I may be wrong and I might not be citing any sources, but neither is he. If he's not going to put any effort into his arguments, why should I?
So that the Big Bang represents literally the origin of the universe out of nothing.
No, it does not. Because you don't know what was before the Big Bang. And I'm not convinced anyone knows for certain what was before the Big Bang.
Now, the difficulty is, of course, that out of nothing, nothing comes.
Okay, substantiate that point. Prove it. It's very, again, and I feel like I'm going to get very, very repetitive. It's easy for you to just say that, but how do you demonstrate and prove that? Nothing is not a thing, as far as I'm aware, that we can test, and we can't determine what comes out of nothing or what may not come out of nothing. And since we don't even know what nothing is, because we can't even properly test it, how can we make claims about what it can and can't do?
To say that the universe just popped into being uncaused out of nothing would be worse than magic.
Why? Why would that be any worse than magic? As a matter of fact, how is that any more distinct from magic?
When a magician pulls a rabbit out of the hat, at least you've got the magician.
The magician doesn't make the trick any easier to understand, and that doesn't make it any better, whatever that's supposed to mean. You say at least you have the magician as if that makes it better, but that still doesn't explain where the rabbit came from if the rabbit came from anywhere. The problem with the illusory experience of magic is not the magician or the absence thereof. It's the trick itself. No one is concerned with the fact that a person saw a woman in half, sawed a woman in half. They are more concerned with the actual trick itself, that a woman was sawed in half. That is usually the primary concern. Likewise, with the universe, our primary concern is its origin, absent any agent or lack thereof.
Not to mention the hat. But on atheism, you have to say that the universe just popped into being uncaused out of absolutely nothing.
No, you don't. All you've done is describe a basic, albeit not exactly charitable interpretation of the Big Bang Theory, which not necessarily all atheists accept. You can be, for example, a religious atheist that's part of a religion that encapsulates no gods, and that would have a completely different alternative explanation of the universe. Being an atheist does not necessarily mean you have to have this particular conclusion, and you don't get to tell atheists what conclusions they must have.
Which is surely absurd.
Is it? I mean, people tend to say that all the time, that the universe coming into existence out of nothing is absurd, but I don't see any reason why it necessarily would be. Granted, I don't understand how a process would work, if it could work that way at all, but I don't see my lack of intuitive understanding as a reason to disavow or discredit the Big Bang. I have no idea how things worked before the Big Bang, and they might have functioned in such a ways as things come into existence out of nothing. We simply don't know. And because we don't know, I don't think we have any grounds to judge any particular conclusion as absurd.
So that it seems to me far more rational to say that there is a transcendent cause of the universe which brought it into existence.
What is a transcendent anything? I understand what a cause is, but I don't understand what it means for something to be transcendent. And I also don't understand why the cause of the universe must necessarily be a transcendent cause. For example, we humans in our physical universe create other humans, and that human did not pop into existence out of nothing, nor was it created by something that transcended it. If we can create things without transcending the things we create, I don't understand why something else couldn't have caused the universe without transcending the universe.
You've got a great illustration of what you're talking about using a balloon.
It's very important to understand that on the Big Bang model, the theory is not that the material universe is expanding into a pre-existing empty space. Rather, according to this model, space and time themselves come into being at the Big Bang.
Citation needed.
And a very good way to visualize this is by imagining a balloon with buttons pasted onto the surface of the balloon. Now, the buttons are glued in place, so they don't move relative to the surface of the balloon. But as you blow up the balloon, the buttons will get further and further and further apart because the surface of the balloon is expanded. Now, the surface of the balloon is just like our three-dimensional space. As space expands, the galaxies get further and further and further apart. Now, this has the radical implication that as you trace the expansion back in time, they get closer and closer and closer together until at some point in the finite past, the entire universe is contracted down to a single point before which it literally did not exist.
That last part, you're going to need a citation for. I was with you up until everything contracted to a single point. At that point, I was with you, and then you said before which it did not exist. That is something that I've never heard anyone say. Not to say that people don't say it, but I've not heard a compelling case for it. I'm not convinced at it at all. And I've never heard that with regards to the Big Bang Theory at all. So you're going to have to substantiate that and show where you're getting some of this at least.
So that the controlling paradigm of contemporary cosmology is that the universe began to exist out of nothing about 14 billion years ago.
Yeah, and I think that lay people pick up on the web, and they pick up when they're reading some of the scientific journals and even pop literature, is that philosophers of science are saying, stay tuned, because really, instead of nothing, this nothing is really something. And that's not what the theory is really saying. Explain that.
There has been a great deal.
Okay, so before I address what was said in the stream, apparently we have a visitor. So I'd like that visitor to introduce themselves.
What's up, Secret Man? You know who I am. How's it going?
It's going great.
All right, William Lane Craig talking about stuff he doesn't know.
Of course. So far, we're at the point where he's saying he's describing the Big Bang Theory, and at first it sounds like he knows what he's talking about, right up until he gets to the point where it's like everything contracted backwards into a singularity.
You know,
before that, there was nothing.
Yeah, I love how they're social distancing here. But I heard him like the paradigm of and it just struck me. It's like, this is the sort of thing like you get with quantum woo, where people are like, they'll just say like really long words that sound like they know what they're talking. They don't have any idea what they're talking about. The paradigm shift of the cosmology within the implications of the magistrate within the temporal vortex of the accepted science is so great that obviously proves this 2,000-year-old book is true. Don't you understand? I mean, you'd have to be stupid. Like, what? You said nothing.
Precisely. And that's the difference between science and pseudoscience, is they both sound like science. So if you don't actually use skepticism, it's very easy to mistake one for another. But if you actually stop and think about it, you will understand that your inability to tell the difference between the two is a really important point as to why you shouldn't believe either one until you have a good reason.
Yeah,
not just something that sounds like a good reason.
You have to be somewhat scientific literate at some level. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I understand cosmology, but I certainly think that I understand enough to know I'm not qualified to explain all of it. And here's this guy, he's a theologian, he's an apologist, he's a philosopher, and it's like, yeah, what's your degree? And it reminds me of this person I think there was a text exchange I had. He said, well, I said, when, regarding the KCA, the cosmological argument, which of course he's in love with and he would marry if he could, that this is something for science to explore. He says, well, why can't philosophy do it? I'm like, because there's no system there. I mean, unless you're going to go with logic, which is a subset, it's in philosophy. In science, I suppose you could say there's, philosophy of science. But there isn't a coherent system within just philosophy in and of itself to know that you got to the right conclusion. It's like, when was the last time a philosopher was able to use their ideas to, predict something or make something different? It's like very, it does happen, but it's rare. It's not something you can guarantee like you can with the scientific method. So if you're going to explore the real world of cosmology, you're going to have to use science. You can't just use philosophy on this. And this is the old tired, well, we know cause and effect works, so we're just going to keep going backwards and assume that keeps going on, even though we don't know if it does or not. So you're going to run into a problem of the unknown, where you're just assuming things with deductive reasoning. And deductive reasoning fails in actual science, and you don't know how things are going to actually behave. You wouldn't, necessarily expect things to behave the way that they do.
Yes, and a side point to that I think is very important is the structure of philosophy is almost always argumentation. It is a set of premises and a conclusion, and the way that one proves the soundness of the argument is through the soundness of the premises, which would have to be determined by some external means. So if you have a premise in an argument, we have to verify that. We have to see if that premise is actually true. We cannot merely take the premise for granted and say, well, if all the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Therefore, the whole argument is sound. That's not how that works.
Right. The argument might be valid. It might be structured right, but the soundness is all that really, in the end, matters.
Yes.
And, you know,
And
the
philosophy-
philosophers, they you know, pull out these old, worn-out arguments, and of course, then they do apologetics to make excuses for why the argument still functions, even though it's broken and been broken.
Mhm.
And you know, or again in the quantum cosmological argument KCA video I have, where the guys just kept going, and I was just like, I was so tired, I didn't want to even read what he said. I was like, yeah, okay, well, why don't you just come on my show? We'll talk, you know, because you know you're saying things and I don't, you know, it's like, you know, why, you know, well, you got the argument wrong. You didn't analyze the actual KCA. You don't understand the actual KCA because it's metaphysical, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, that's nice.
Whether or not it is the things that they say they are is not relevant to the point of trying to effectively communicate your ideas to other people. So you can use a lot of words that nobody knows, and those words might be a correct description of the term. But if that doesn't convey anything to anybody, you haven't accomplished much of anything.
Yeah. And you know, you say things, you say the words, things that begin to exist, and already you are in La La Land because it's like, well, what things? What do you mean by things?
Mm-hmm.
You mean everything. That's what you're saying. You're saying everything. You're talking about all the things in the universe. But then what do you mean begin to exist? What does that mean? You know, it's like, well, when does the yardstick begin to exist? Does it begin to exist the moment it's the size of a yardstick? Does it begin to exist when you put marks on it? Did it begin to exist when it was a tree? You know, it's just, you know, and but they shrug all that off because it's like, well, it began to exist at some point, and as long as I have that, then I can. And of course, the huge jump. I don't know if he's gotten it to yet. Has he gotten to this jump of special pleading that's required for God to do all this? God is the opposite of all the things that the universe is. So God is not space. It's not time. It's full of power, and it doesn't have entropy at all. Apparently, God is existent for all time and always will be and always has. So it's immune to entropy. It's not made of anything. Like, well, then it's not. If it's not made of anything, it's like, well, but it's not made of material. Well, it's got to be made of. It has to be something. It can't just be nothing, right? So by saying it's spiritual or supernatural, it's like, well, you've simply avoided the question of what is it made out of. Like, you can't just say it is, and that seems to be what they say it is. But anyway,
Yeah.
I'm spoiling the argument. I know.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil the rest of the video.
Yeah, spoiled this old argument.
So we'll get back in. So we'll get back into it, and I have a lot of thoughts on all of those things. But I'll discuss them as they come up.
Who's this? Is this just some random other apologist or John?
I think this is just someone doing an interview. I'm not familiar with him as an apologist. This seems to be much more about William Lane Craig than about him.
Here's easy questions for you to answer. And then he's just going to go, oh, yeah, that's true.
Because that's how interviews work.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Information in popular press and television shows about quantum mechanics with regard to the origin of the universe. It's said that in quantum mechanics you can get particles that fluctuate into existence out of the quantum vacuum, and that therefore it is true that something can come into being from nothing, and so you can get the universe coming into existence without a cause from nothing. What these persons fail to explain is that the quantum vacuum in physics is not nothing. It is not what the layman thinks of as a vacuum. The quantum vacuum is a sea of energy, a sea of violent activity governed by physical laws. It is.
What does a sea of violent activity even mean?
What are you talking about? I mean,
you're supposed to be talking about quantum physics, there's an experiment, the name escapes me. The experiment is basically where you observe particles,
Hmm.
and the particles seem to appear in random locations without
Right.
any particular cause.
Yeah,
They don't seem
I
to
was
do
watching a kid.
something to move from one point to another. They just seem to pop up all over the place. And the interpretation that he's taken of that is that people who have heard that experiment are using that as evidence to say that it is possible for something to come from nothing because it's happening here at the quantum
Yeah,
level.
that's not what I mean by nothing. So I'm just going to equivocate on the word nothing. So then, my nothing is actually nothing. You're talking about quantum soup, and that's not really nothing. So you're not really talking about my argument.
But that's what he's saying, is he's saying that when people say that, the quantum vacuum that they are describing is not the layman
Yeah,
term of
no,
nothing.
that's what I'm saying. Is he said, well, that's not really nothing. Well, what if that is what nothing is, or that is to say, there is no such thing as nothing. It's just quantum soup behind all of it, and that's where the universe came from. The quantum soup existed for all time.
Mhm.
Why is that?
Um, oh, I was just gonna say at some point when we're done, I might link to something regarding Tracy Harris, and she gave a very insightful interpretation of nothing and its usefulness in the sense that we don't really know what it is. There's no real way to test it. There's no real way to know what it is, what it does, how it functions. And if it really is nothing, then what are we even talking about? How can you have any meaningful discussion about nothing? That sounds like a contradiction in terms as it is. So, nothing is incredibly ill defined as is, as well as there's just no information on it. So I don't think we can make any definitive claims about it at all because it's not even a thing.
Yeah, that's the philosophical notion of a true nothingness. Um, there would, we get into this thing of, well, there wouldn't be any rules, because if you had a rule, then you don't have nothing, right?
Exactly.
So the moment you say I have nothing, oh, then you can do whatever you want because there's no rules. Well, no. You can't have something come out of it without a rule. You can't have a rule. The moment you have a rule, then you have something. So let's say something pops into being from the nothing because it did, and there isn't any rule to stop it from doing that. And then you go, well, now why doesn't it happen all the time? Well, because now you have something. So the moment you don't have a nothing anymore that could break the rules, you now have a something that has some rule to it, and that's why it doesn't keep happening. Or maybe it does keep happening for all we know, wherever there is a nothing. I mean, it's just the failure to think of these things is evident for these sort of apologetics, because the only answer has to be God. It can't be any
Exactly.
other answer. It has to be that answer. But I was saying about quantum physics, there's a guy, the Silence of Salem channel, where he explains or has his wife react to quantum mechanics, and the difficulty of explaining any of it to at all at any level is evident in that video. And here's a guy that he knows enough to explain it to some degree. He's no Richard, what's his name, Freeman
Richard
type,
Dawkins?
huh?
You
No,
said Richard. Are you talking about Richard Dawkins or someone
no,
else?
the quantum guy.
I'm not familiar with
Feynman.
quantum woo people, so
No, real guy, Feynman, however you want to say it. Can't say it. But Richard Feynman, who led quantum physics and did a whole bunch of stuff regarding that. But at any rate, so the Silence of the Elm guy knows enough about quantum physics to actually explain it, and none of the things he's talking about sound remotely even close to what Craig is saying. It's like, oh, there's this quantum energy. It's like, no, that's not even really what they say it is. So it's kind of like, it reminds me of the creationist, where it's like they use these words that are close but have no meaning. Like, or they'll say kind, that has no meaning to it. There's no meaning to this. So they're knowledgeable enough to be dangerous.
But yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say when he says things like a sea of violent energy, which sounds impressive, but that doesn't really make sense because it's not actually a sea, and it's not actually what we would consider energy, but it's
Nor is it
just his
violent.
renditioning of it. And that's the thing is, even if what he's saying is true, his presentation is so
Yeah,
vague that you can't actually understand what he's talking about because he's not being specific saying that this thing is interacting with this thing in this way. It's just a whole bunch of violent seas of energies doing stuff.
right. And but the thing is that he also is pretending that isn't there with this counter is that nobody is. We're not interested in the nothing, Craig, because we don't even know that that's a thing that is a thing at all. You know,
Exactly.
what we're saying is look at the quantum stuff coming in to existence, apparently uncaused. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about that particular counter example. Is I don't know now. Maybe there is a cause, and I just don't know quantum physics. You know, so I have no idea. But here's this thing coming into existence out of this quantum energy, and it appears to be uncaused. So if that can happen, then why can't it happen at a great scale? And that's what he's burying under the rug of quantum C energy, whatever the hell else he's saying. Ah, ah. I'm not logged in, and if I hit log in, I'll reset. Yeah. I'm gonna talk while
Yeah.
he's doing real life. So yeah, well, I saw William Lane Craig lately. He's old. He got old,
Yeah.
and he was like in this orange uh, shirt, and it looked like he was like in prison or something. He looked so bad in this. Oh my god! I thought. All right, we back.
Yep.
We're in.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
So
I'm covering for you. You know,
yeah,
everything.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Hit play.
I said this in my last stream, but it's always an awkward moment when you tell people you're going to be doing something, so they should give you the space to do that, and then they don't
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. My brother was like, "Hey, I need this password." Like, I'm live, right? Yeah. 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 Real quick. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Why
So
not? I'll just walk away from the.
of course,
This is a hot mess. So let's skip past this. Edit it out later. Okay. Go back to the
yeah,
video.
Most emphatically not nothing. So that even if the early stages of the universe during the first split second of its existence is characterized or described by a quantum mechanical vacuum, that is not the origin of the universe out of nothing. And the point is, quantum vacuum state cannot have persisted to infinity past.
why? Why can't it have persisted to infinity past? People tend to say this a lot and sort of just assume that I forget the technical term, but things going backwards infinitely or an infinite regression, people tend to just assume that an infinite regression can't happen. And I don't see any obvious reason why that has to be the case, especially when we're talking about a quantum vacuum that doesn't seem to operate with the same set of rules that the rest of the macro universe does.
Yeah, I had this debate or discussion. I don't remember now, but with somebody. I think it was on my channel. I don't know. I've done too many things now. That infinity's not even a real thing, so you can't ever have it. I'm like, but it is real because you have the I forget what the paradox is called, but you move when you move your foot, you've moved it an infinite amount of inches or not inches, but an infinite amount of spaces because you can break it
Yes.
down. You can break down the feet to inches to keep going smaller and smaller indefinitely. So you have moved past infinity, and so but infinity is not really real, but it is in that sense. And it's like, well, but if the universe was infinite, then it would never get here. Yes, it would, just in the same way that if I'm moving forward, I cross several infinities to do so. So if you're moving forward, it doesn't matter how much infinite is, but there's all this infinite in front of you. It doesn't matter because there's eventually a point where you cross this threshold. He's like, well, then it's not infinity. I'm like, no, it's still infinity. It's just you cross the start line, and now you're at the start of what we consider to be our universe or whatever. But before that was just this infinite amount of well, not time. So there wasn't anything there to to cross per se. But if there was, let's say that there was, just for the sake of it, there's still nothing. It's still moving. Everything's still moving forward. At least if there was time, it would time moves forward. So that's a direction it has to go. And so it it's like, well, you can have an infinite river. You'd have a river that has, I guess it wouldn't be a river, but you could have a body of water and say, well, where's the start of it and where's the end? There isn't really one. You have to kind of pick that this is the start and that's the end, right? But
Exactly. I was
so
going to say that when
yeah,
it comes to measurements of space, those are more human constructed, and our measurements of inches and things like that are sort of our kind of arbitrary settings of finite distance. These
yeah,
are all sort of terms that we come up with. Like inches only exist insofar as that we believe they exist and we apply them. The space that they refer to does, but the literal inches are not there. There's not literally an inch in a certain amount of time in a certain amount of space. That's just a label that we quantify for that particular amount of space. So if we take all the labels out of it, then when we get to things like infinity, the concept breaks down because it's something that we're defining. It is a term that we are defining. So at the end of the day, it really depends on what you mean by the term. At the end of the
right,
day,
and
what infinity is depends on which definition that you happen to be
yeah,
using.
and they'll switch it. They'll say infinity is impossible, but then you go, but God's well, that's not what I mean by infinite when you're talking about God. God's eternal. Okay, what's the difference between eternal and infinity? And I did actually have an answer when I was a Christian, which was that infinity has a start and no end. But eternity has no start and no end. So eternity is basically infinity pointing both directions. But that doesn't really tell you the difference between the two because there really isn't one. Yeah, you had a start in one, and the other you don't really have a starting point. But it's like you could say maybe one is a bigger infinite than the other or something like this, and there are bigger. All the collection of all Mozart is one infinite, and then all the collection of Rembrandt is another infinite, and then if you combine those two, you have a bigger infinite than you did before. It's very interesting.
Yes.
But it's like, well, but it's not really infinite because like yeah, you could summarize all human words and knowledge and everything, and it would if you watched everything, listened to everything, read everything that there ever was or ever you would eventually run out. It would take you goodness knows how many years. Let's assume you live forever, whatever. But you could do it, and because it is a finite amount. And there was even this web page where you could go and there was like some mathematical equation to it where you could type in anything that would quote find what you would type end quote, and because every letter that was possible was there, and so it's basically like eventually everything will have been already said by this website, at least it hypothetically because of the algorithm or whatever. So it's monkeys on a typewriter, infinitely doing stuff, and eventually, yes, they will write Shakespeare, and eventually they will write everything. If and maybe you
If
have to
they're given enough time.
yeah, if you give them enough time, and also of course you can speed it up if there's a filtering mechanism.
Well,
But
also given enough time and assuming that the variables don't change. So assuming
right,
that the monkeys are typing whichever manner they're typing is exactly the same, then given enough time they will. But if you
yeah,
change the variables up, like the monkey switch or the way that they type switch, then that affects the probability. I use this
right,
example in or I no, I've done recordings, so that spoilers alert. But I use this in some upcoming videos where the way that fixed laws appear to work is simply in the same way that math works. If you put in the same numbers and you perform the same equation, you will get the same outcome every single time. And the universe functions the same way. If we have the same subjects, say a planet, and the same law, say gravity, and the variables don't change at all, you will always get the same result. But if you change them ever so slightly, it's possible to get a different result. And that doesn't demonstrate that the law is not a constant. That just means that it depends on what it is. In the same way that the result you will get out of a mathematical equation depends on what numbers you put in and depends on the equation. But if the equation and the numbers are the same, you will always get the same result. And the same applies with outcomes. If whatever caused the universe or anything in it plays out exactly the same way, then, or at least within the confines of the universe, you should always get the same results. Like you said before, with nothing, if there was a nothing before the universe, then there were no laws or no rules to restrict anything, so everything would be equally as likely as everything else.
Right.
But working within our internal framework and the way that the universe seems to function, if things happen exactly the same way, then you will get the exact same result every single time. But if the slightest variable is changed, then it's easy to get a different result. But
Well, we're gonna
that was
put
just a
a pin
side
in
note.
there is no infinity because we're gonna nail him for it later. But
Yeah, yeah,
okay, yeah, sure, Craig. There's no infinity. Let's see you break that later. Go ahead.
yeah. So let's go.
It had a beginning, and therefore we're thrust into the question of why did the origin of the universe occur? What brought the universe into being?
Before we get into that, so I because I'm trying not to do that, but this is the thing I run into with why is that why to me isn't a meaningful question. The mechanisms how is what matters, because it's sort of akin to when when someone is diagnosed with something like diabetes. They can ask why they have diabetes, but that doesn't really have all that much pragmatic value, even if there was a why. And at the end of the day, there might not be a why. As much as we as humans don't like it, there might not be an answer to the questions that we have. So I don't necessarily think it's meaningful to harp on why, because why doesn't give you any information that you can then use to affect the circumstance of the situation. Whereas how does.
Can you go back a second here on the video
Sure.
before the words?
Press the wrong thing.
Yeah, words.
Quantum vacuum state cannot have persisted to infinity past. It had a beginning, and therefore we're thrust into the question of why did the
origin. There it is. Pause right there. Okay. So you're assuming that the origin of the universe is a thing that occurred.
Yeah, of course, there's that.
The question itself assumes that this is true. This is why did you stop being your wife? Well, he's assuming this. He's assuming this question is already true because he thinks he established it. So then he's saying, well, why did this happen? Which you can't.
Yes.
There isn't a why. You could say, how did it happen?
Mm-hmm.
Now that you've discovered somehow that it happened.
Yes.
And I guess it's semantics, because it's like, well, it really means the same thing. Well, no, it doesn't, but, whatever. I mean, that's fine. I'm not, I mean, we could, let's nitpick him to death because we can, or do we give him a pass? No, I don't think so. He doesn't get a pass. Not anymore. So this assumes intentionality on top of that your question is already meaningful.
Yes.
Like I can ask you, why did you start the stream? Well, because you wanted to. I don't know. I was bored. It's my hobby. Anything. Who knows? How did you start it? Well, I started it by going to StreamYard.
Of course.
So the why can give me some information, but that assumes intentionality. It assumes that something is behind it. So why is that rock there? There isn't a why. It's just there. It's not there just so the bear can scratch itself. It's just there. There is no why to it.
Yes, that's all I was saying.
That rock there, but yeah.
Yeah, that's all I was saying. With every question you have, might not have an answer.
Right. But, yeah. Exactly.
Let's keep going.
Yeah. Go. The next part was what brought the universe. So there's another assumption there. There's
I think that is supposed to be the how. Or I think that's supposed to be the how question that he's trying to say.
Well, I don't, because I know that he has a what in mind. He's saying what, which is again intentionality. These two questions combined are pointing to the answer he's already going for, which is God. This being that has a will and desires and a brain. Well, not a brain, but a mind somehow. So he's saying what? So there's a what that brought the universe into a being. And this is because we had the why. I think that it's fair to say we already know that he's aiming towards a intentional being rather than a physical necessity or natural. He's aiming for a creature that brought the universe into being with this question.
I think that's accurate for him. I don't necessarily think that that's accurate for the question by itself, because what does not necessarily limit it to a creature. But I think that's kind of our prior knowledge of William Lane.
Right. Well, I think that if you had a question of why and then what, I think that well, I don't know. I mean, you're getting into critical analysis there. But if you had like why is this stream going? What started this stream? I think that I am indicating that I think it's an entity. But yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, whatever. Let's debate this.
What it points to is a transcendent cause of the physical universe. And when you reflect on what properties such a cause would have to have, a number of very theologically significant attributes fall out. For example,
before he gets to that, what does it mean for something to be transcendent? I still don't understand what that term means, and I haven't heard a clear definition that makes any sense.
I love that, it's like, oh, these theological implications arise. What are you what does that mean? Who cares? What do you mean theology? You mean
what that, as far as I can tell,
like, because you're obviously you're talking about your particular brand of theology. There isn't a theology like there is a science. There are many theological ideas out there. Yours is one of them. But by saying theology, it's kind of like the label of God, where it's like, when I say God, well, what God do you think I'm talking about? Well, probably the one that you're most familiar with or believe in already. More than likely, you're not abstracting it to just the word, because that's not how, that's not.
Well, yeah, that depends on the context of the conversation, because lots of people have conversations about other people's gods, right. But with regard to him specifically, like when phrases are used, like when he says things like implications, that is him asserting that there are connections between the things that he said previously and the conclusions that he's going to draw to. The problem is he does not make the connection in between. So he says this thing implies this other thing, and he says what the two things are, but he doesn't say what exactly connects them. So you're kind of left thinking, how did we get from here to over there?
I think it's intellectually dishonest on his part, and because he could say this within our theology, this has implications, or something, or within my theology, or something like that. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't. He says theology as if it's a maybe he assumes that we're taking to understand that he means his, but I just don't want to give that sort of leniency to this guy because he's been around so long. He should know better by now. I would phrase it that way. I would say within my theology. Okay, so within his theology of his brand of Christianity, there are implications. Okay, so what is that referring to? Where does theology come from? Okay, you could say theology comes from the pulpit. Well, to some extent, because pastors, preachers, ministers, rabbis, whatever you want to call them, are interpreting the message of the book. Or you could say, well, the theology comes from the book itself. So every time he's talking about theology, even, he's just talking about what the Bible says. Has he proven the Bible is true? No. So all of this points to things that align with what I think the Bible is telling me is true. That's what he's saying.
I think he does say that, but I think here, so I don't necessarily think it's intellectually dishonest. I think he genuinely believes the things that he's saying are
Oh yeah,
not
yeah. I mean,
merely his theology. He believes that this is the objective truth of the matter. He thinks this is how it is for everybody.
yeah. I mean,
Saying what you
intellectually
think is
dishonest.
objectively true, I wouldn't categorize that as intellectually dishonest, but I
Yeah,
would say that it is a bit I would say that it is overly presumptuous to make that assumption that
yeah.
your theology is representative of all reality. I would
Right.
definitely call that
Yeah, it's like,
presumptuous.
well, it's kind of like the lazier approach, I guess. I don't know what I mean by intellectually dishonest with that idea, but at any rate, it doesn't matter. The creationist was, the beginning of the universe. Oh, look, it said begin, and look, the Genesis says begin. So there you go. We're right. Haha. It's like, wow, you found a thing that happened to maybe align kind of with reality. But then if you're going to go down that route, it's like, well, the age is wrong. So the Hindus got it closer. They're not right either, but the Hindus at least have an older universe. So they're closer to being right than you guys. So let's see what their theology says. So, but yeah, transcendent. It transcends. That's the definition. What?
And I also don't find a transcendent cause to be necessary. And I think I said this like literally right before you joined the stream, but it seems to me that humans can cause other humans all the time, and we don't transcend each other in any meaningful sense. So I don't see why that would be any different than the universe. I don't see why it would need a transcendent cause any more than a human needs a transcendent cause or a tree needs a transcendent cause.
Yeah, I don't want to appeal to definition because there's going to be different definitions of this. But Google says, transcendent the basic ground concept from the word's literal meaning of climbing, going beyond a bit with varying connotations, different historical and cultural statements. Well, what does that mean? That doesn't tell you what it means. Like, okay, so it's beyond. Okay, so if I was looking at it like a poet, I would say, tiger, tiger, burning bright. You're not talking about a tiger, first of all, because it's not spelled the same. You're not. You're also not talking about it burning, actually burning.
Of
These are
course.
these are meant to be. It's meant to invoke. Well, you could look at it that way if you wanted to, I suppose, because it's just meant to invoke imagery and ideas in your brain of things. So the words are just a placeholder for you to then fill in what they mean. So if by transcendent we mean it can mean more than it says, then you could literally get anything from it that you want. It's like, well, what does run mean? What does it mean to run? Well, that means you're going fast. Oh no, I just the word run by itself could mean all sorts of
Well,
things.
I also think it's important to determine. I don't think there are objective definitions because definitions are created by subjects. So
Right.
we have to understand what each person is trying to say. And that's what I mean whenever I say I don't understand a definition of a term. I'm not referring to some objective definition that I don't know. I'm saying whenever William Lane Craig says this, or whenever people make the similar arguments that he says, I don't understand what they mean or what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
I don't understand the idea or the concept they're
Yeah,
trying
no,
to
yeah, neither
cross.
do I. I would love a language that was, precise with every word meant only one thing. That'd be great, but it would be an artificial language. But and who knows if we could even make it? But yeah, the transcendent by itself. So okay, it has to be. We have a physical universe, but okay, I guess you could say physical. I mean, like I guess that's a way to describe it. And then you're saying, so there's a cause of the universe, which you apparently he thinks he established. And then you're saying transcendent. Okay, when did the transcendent bit come into the thing? Because I think you said that too. It's like all of a sudden this word that he had not argued for has made an appearance.
Yes.
And we didn't get the argument for this word transcendent to be there. It's just all of a sudden, well, the cause of the universe has to be transcendent because here's the argument for that, and then what transcendent means is the following. But we don't get that. It's just here's the transcendent. What do you mean transcendent?
and And that is exactly what I was talking about before when I said he will say one point implies another point and not say the connection between the 2 points. He'll just
Association
jump.
causation failure. Yeah.
But
All
yeah,
right.
I
What is the
definitely want
transit?
to.
What is it must be? What is it must be? Here's all the
Yes,
con things that it must be.
yes.
These are
But I
all
do
the
want to make.
opposite of the universe. Here we go.
Yeah, I do want to make sure because we're almost an hour in, and I
Yeah.
always try to stay around the 2 hour mark. So I
Oh, okay.
want to make sure we get through the video.
No problem. Sorry.
No, it's
Be
okay.
an uncaused being. It would have to be non-physical and immaterial because it created all the matter in the universe.
What does that have to do with creating the matter in the universe? Why do you have to be non physical to create the physical? And why do you have to be immaterial to create the material? Because I seem to see material things create each other all the time, and I seem to see physical things create each other all the time. So I don't understand why any of those things are necessary. The
Yeah.
uncaused thing is just an assumption. So there's just no justification for that. I think I understand what that means, but practically speaking, I don't understand how such a thing could function. But putting
Yeah.
the uncaused thing aside, physical things seem to create physical, or I'm sorry, not create, cause. Physical things seem to cause physical things all the time. Immaterial things seem to cause immaterial things all the time. So I don't see why the cause of those things must have been immaterial when they can cause each other.
Yeah. He's trying to get to this that it can't be caused, so it has to be the opposite of cause because cause and effect can goes back indefinitely. He said you can't do true infinity. So therefore, it can't be caused. It has to be uncaused. Okay. So well, what about physical? Well, it could be physical, but then of course the problem there is that all physical things have a cause, so it can't be physical. And it can't be material, which is really the same thing as physical, so we don't really need immaterial, because that really is the same thing as physical. He's saying the same thing twice. But it can't
Yeah,
be these things, it has to be the opposite. But basically you've defined this into non existence. Because if it's not physical or and there is no material, then what is it? That's the problem I
yes,
have with this concept.
yes.
It isn't even a thing anymore.
Exactly. And I agree with what you said in the sense of he's not telling you what it is, he's only telling you what it's not, which doesn't give you any actual information to go off of in trying to determine its actual nature or its actual attributes or qualities or anything. If I
Yeah, I mean,
tell you all the things that a person isn't, you won't really get a good idea of what they are.
yeah, it's like you're a skeleton. You're not made out of flesh. You're not, you. I don't know if you have marrow in you still. So but you're not. You're not a rock. You're not a cat. We could go on and on. It doesn't. But what is he?
I know, and but you have to presume, and that's why I do these from the framework of a skeptical perspective. If you're talking to someone who doesn't know what a skeleton is and they've never seen one, and you just tell them it's not a rock, that doesn't help them understand what a skeleton is. If you tell them it's not a this thing, you're not going to get any close. The person will have a very difficult time getting a closer understanding of what it is if you exclusively tell them what it's not, and they don't have an understanding of what this thing is, as in they've never heard it before, which is why I try to address the video from that perspective.
Right, right. It describing it's describing skeleton without ever using the word skeleton, but it's also describing it of what it isn't, and it's completely. Uh, Maybe it doesn't have to be useful because he doesn't care if it's useful. He's like, here's these things that it is. Apparently, it's not these things, and these things are all the things that I think God is. Therefore, it's God because they all check the boxes or something like that. And it's like I
Which,
get, I get that. I get that. That I mean, there is a logical flow there, but it's not sound.
yeah, I'm not, like I said, because I don't understand what something would mean. Even if we speak in these negative terms, I don't understand what it would be mean for something to be immaterial. So I'm not even willing to grant that there's a logical flow to it because I don't know what immaterial means. I don't know what transcendent means. When you throw in these terms that are ill-defined, I can't even concede some sort of logical validity because you're using terms
Well,
that
I'll give
don't
a
understand.
stab at immaterial. What I've heard some say is like, well, the number one is immaterial because it's not, it's just this concept. that exists in our brains, in the mind. So it's not material in that sense. It's like, well, but
Well,
ultimately
yeah,
it is
yes,
bound to the material. So, but yeah,
yeah. But the thing with regarding what he means specifically, the number one would be a mental construct. It would not be a thing out there. It would be something that exists in our minds insofar as we conceive of it. But that's not what he means about God. If he's when he's saying that God exists, presumably, he's not just saying God exists as a concept in your mind. He's saying God is an actual being that is outside the universe, whatever that means, and transcends it, whatever that means, and so on and so forth. It's not just in your mind.
it's
So when
Plato's.
you
It's
say
Plato.
that, then we have to throw out numbers and
Yeah,
concepts
yeah.
and things like that.
Well,
And
it's
it's like,
kind of like,
okay, if you're not referring to something mental when you say immaterial, then what are you referring to?
yeah, I think it's like Plato's forms. It's like you see the shadow of the thing. You don't see the actual thing casting the shadow, right? And so the thing that's casting the shadow is God. Goodness knows what the light is, but don't worry about that. But
Yeah.
the main thing is that, so here's this shadow, this outline of and that what caused the outline, what caused the shadow, and the thing that caused the shadow is God, right? Of course, Plato's forms were wrecked by Aristotle, who's my man for logic, But uh, yeah, it doesn't. It's like the thing that caused the shadow can't be like anything else I know, so it can't be physical. But the thing that caused the shadow is physical. But you ruled it out because you're basing it on things. You're saying it can't be this, it can't be that, and so you're arriving at conclusions which not only are potentially and probably wrong, but definitely I would. Well, anyways, yeah, go on.
Yeah. So yeah, from now on, we're gonna have to try to maybe like limit our own responses because
Yeah, I know.
we'll be stuck at
Stop
this
it.
seven
Stop it.
minute mark for the
Stop it.
rest of the stream.
All right, all right. I'll do.
All right.
It would have to be non-temporal, that is to say timeless, because it created time as well as space. It would therefore have to be changeless. It would have to be enormously powerful in order to bring the universe into existence. And moreover, I would argue this being is also plausibly personal as well. Now, why is that?
Before we get to that, I'm going to address these slides all together instead of doing them one by one. So, as far as the timeless thing goes, I don't know what it means for something to exist in for no particular amount of time. I have no conception of what that means because it's just so far and beyond anything I could even conceive of. So, no idea what he means by that. Changeless. Uh, why? Why would it have to be changeless just because it's timeless? I mean, I guess some form of change would imply some passing of time, but you could say the same thing about its very existence and its ability to do anything. So I don't see why it would then have to be changeless. If it can have all these other random attributes that you gave it and also be changeless, then I don't understand why it has to be changeless, especially if we go with a conception that is, as he says next, powerful. If it has that level of power, whatever power means in this context, then why is it limited to any of the particular attributes that it has? If it really is all powerful, then none of the attributes it has for any necessary reason. It just has it because it hasn't changed them. And as far as personal, that is the biggest Hail Mary in this sort of argument that he does, where he kind of goes over different attributes of what this cause might be. And you can sort of see maybe it might have these sort of attributes, but then he just goes, oh, by the way, it cares about who you marry. And then you lose me. And then you lose me. You lose me once you start saying it's personal. And that
Yeah,
has nothing to do with anything we were talking about.
the
So,
non-changing thing that has power somehow also cares where you put your ding dong. Sure, why not?
exactly.
Yeah, okay, yeah, all right. If
Yeah.
you say so, yeah.
Yeah. So that's all I had to say. I'll give you a chance to speak and then we'll go on.
I just would say changeless would mean that it can't make anything else then, because making something else would be a change. So then it could never create.
Yeah, how can it be changeless yet also produce change?
Yeah,
And
so
isn't the act of producing change a change
yeah,
itself?
that's well, it's a change outside of itself. Well, yeah, but then it would always have to be producing stuff. So then it would be changeless if it was always producing things.
Yes, but even the act of changing is a change. If you are participating in the act of change, how can
Yeah,
you
if I'm
participate in the
always
act and
changing,
be
then
a
I'm
functional
changeless.
part of it?
I've always been changing, so I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Go on.
All right, all right.
Well, it's the only way you can explain how to get a temporal effect with a beginning from a permanent, timeless cause that has existed eternally.
We haven't established that it's a timeless cause eternally, and we've already been over that. But things like this is the only way are the kind of presumptuous things that I sort of think you were talking about before. Because to say that is to say that you've considered all the other alternatives, all the other ways to explain the universe that we have, and you have debunked all of them. But you're not going to show that here. You're just only going to talk about the one that supports the idea you already believe and just not show the stats the other way around. You're not going to talk about any other way and why it doesn't sufficiently explain the universe or why it's not good enough, why no other conception that doesn't include a God isn't good enough. You're just going to say this is the only way that it can be because, of course, it has to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm right, and that's just the only way it can be. It's that simple, man. What's your problem?
That's probably how it goes. Anything else you want to say before I move on?
Nah, that's it.
Okay.
If the cause were just an impersonal set of mechanically operating conditions, then once the sufficient conditions are given, the effect has to be given as well. If the conditions are there permanently from eternity, the effect would have to be there permanently.
Yeah, you got a great illustration using one.
Okay, but why can't that be how things are? You say that, but then you don't really finish that train of thought. You just sort of say, if the cause was permanent, then the effect must be permanent, which I'm not necessarily willing to grant. But even if I did, how is that not what happened with the universe? You kind of just say that that's a possibility and then just sort of trail off. You say it could be a set of impersonal things that don't have any sort of agency behind them, and then you go on to the next question. So I don't know why he kind of just left that open in the air like that.
No, it'd be a counterfactual to what he's saying, so you have to ignore
Of course.
it. So he's got an analogy. It sounds like he's got an analogy. I want to hear this.
Okay.
Water freezing. Yes, take water for example. The cause of water's freezing is the temperature being below 0 degrees Celsius. If the temperature were below 0 degrees from eternity past, the water would be frozen from eternity past. It would be impossible for the water to just begin to freeze a finite time ago. So how can you get a temporal effect with a beginning from a permanent eternal cause? I can think of only one answer to that.
I think that last sentence is the most telling thing about William Lane Craig. If I could sum up William Lane in a single sentence, it might be that last sentence. I can only think of one thing, and we're just going to go with the best thing that I can think of.
Oh, that is the very essence of appeal to personal incredibility, isn't it?
Exactly.
And I can't think of any other answer, so it's got to be this one.
Mm-hmm. As far as the water thing goes, that kind of is what I was saying with math. If you put in the exact same variables and you do the same equation, you're going to get the same outcome every single time. But he's not taking into account the possibility that the variables could change because he already said it's changeless. So he's already locked himself into this.
And he's basically said, he already said that God is a giant ice cube, anyways, because God doesn't change. So God's always been an ice cube. God can't become water. Well, it is water, but it's always going to be a solid. Wow. Edit that out. God can't be liquid. It's always going to be a solid. So, but and it's just glossed over as well. That's okay because he's got a He's personal, so God can change its mind even though it itself is unchanging. Whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
And that is if the cause is a personal agent endowed with freedom of the will, who can therefore create a new effect without any prior determining conditions.
All right, before he gives an example, I'm just gonna spoil this a little bit because I do plan for my next video to be on free will, so look forward to that. But as far as freely choosing, that as far as I can tell, that means one of two things. The choices that this transcendent cause or anyone makes is either determined or they're not. And if they're determined, then they're not free. And if they're undetermined, they also don't seem free, because to be undetermined seems to be random and arbitrary, and that doesn't seem to imply any degree of control or freedom at all. It just seems to happen. So I don't understand what it means for someone, especially a transcendent cause, to freely choose to do something with no prior cause itself, nothing determining it, nothing leaning it. If
It,
if it chose to create the universe this way, why did it choose to create it this way as opposed to any of the other kinds of ways? Something must have made it do what it did, or just nothing made it do what it did, and that's still not freedom.
You have a number of conflicting problems with what God is, what his God, what Yahweh, I guess we would say, easier than God in a way. What Yahweh is for Craig is conflicting, because you have this agent who can apparently decide, I'm going to make a universe, or I don't feel like making a universe. But you also have a being that cannot go against its nature. And so it's always this sort of thing where it's like, I've always existed, and I've always wanted to make something. But even though I want to make something today, I'm gonna choose not to make something. Tomorrow, I'm also not gonna make something. The day after, I'm not gonna make something. But then the day after that, I will make something. Wait a
But
minute.
even then, that applies some sort of
Yeah.
temporal framework to it.
Right. And so
And
what was good doing before he made the universe? Right. Yeah.
yeah, so then it's like, how do we even speak of any particular behavior
Yeah,
outside
there
of
is
that
no
temporal framework?
prior.
So
Yeah.
if you want to say that he always existed, always is still a temporal measurement, in the same way that infinity is technically still a numerical measurement. If you
Yeah.
take away the concept of numbers, infinity doesn't mean anything.
But
And if you take
and you
away the
have this
concept
thing.
of time, always doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, but I want to really nail this on the head. It's like, if you say I never, you never change. Like, that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. It's an expression like, you never change, or whatever. Well, of course you do change, but this you're saying this being never changes. Its nature, its essence, what it is a creative force. Then it always has to be creating to do that, which it's not creating always, unless that there is no eternity, there is no infinity as far as always existing. It's always creating, which means it always made the universe. And in fact, it can't stop at the universe. It would always have to be creating other things as well, because if it ever stops creating, then its nature changed. So you
Yep.
can't have it both ways. Either its nature is unchanging, which means it's infinitely creating because its nature doesn't change, or its nature does change, which means it's not a choice, because there is no choice if your nature doesn't change. You can't choose something new. It's like, I've always liked vanilla, uh, and then always hated chocolate. And then, oh, wait a minute, I tried chocolate today. I like chocolate. Oh no, I hate vanilla now because I changed.
Mhm.
Something about me internally, whatever, changed. That cannot come about without the ability for me as an agent to change. So God is Yahweh here is stuck in this paradox of its nature never changes, but it can choose to do something different. No, it can't, because it has a nature. So it can never choose. So it doesn't have free will. His God couldn't have free will. But
Yeah.
ignore all that problem. Yeah, forget that problem. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
There's another reason why it can't have free will, but I know William Lane Craig, so trust me, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
A man sitting from eternity could freely will to stand up. And so,
why? If he's changeless, then he couldn't change. So he couldn't change
There's
his
nowhere to stand up yet.
That too.
There's
But
no when you can. There's nowhere and no when for you to standing up requires a. Okay, isn't it?
I know. I know. I know.
They can decide to stand up.
from an eternal cause. And so we're brought not simply to a transcendent cause of the universe, but to its personal creator.
This is such great stuff, Bill. I want to get to the second reason, the existence of God. As you say, the complex order in the universe points to an intelligent designer.
But whatever the initial conditions of the universe might have been, given enough time and a little luck, eventually intelligent life forms like ourselves would evolve. But instead, during the last 50 years or so, scientists have discovered to their surprise that the existence of intelligent life in this universe depends upon a complex and delicate balance of initial conditions given in the Big Bang itself. In fact, it appears that the universe has been incredibly fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life from the very moment of its inception. And this fine-tuning is beyond comprehension in its delicacy. To give you an idea of the delicacy of the fine-tuning, let me just give a couple of numbers to give you a feel for the odds.
I guarantee you he's not going to cite where he gets any of these numbers.
It doesn't matter. Okay, even if we grant it, it's just the fine tuning is a complete misunderstanding of what the science is really saying. It's like here's the if you change the variables, you have less weak electromagnetic radiation or whatever, and that was different than what it was. Then, as far as we understand life, wouldn't be our life wouldn't be possible. If you mess it enough, you get a universe that can't form molecules. And you go, okay, well, definitely there you couldn't have life. And I go, well, I don't know, because it depends what the hell life means. But it basically boils down to if things were different, they'd be different. But of course, life will arise in a universe where life is permitted to do so. So the weak anthropic principle just ruins this whole fine-tuning BS.
Exactly. But it's also something interesting is the universe is fine-tuned for the creation of intelligent life on the planet Earth.
Yeah. The whole universe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you think about all of the places that we can't go without dying, and there just so happens to be one place that we can go without dying, it's just like, well, what are the odds? What are the odds that out of this entire universe, I found one place where I wouldn't die? It's not like I had a million options or an innumerable amount. So I don't, this is my least favorite argument ever, just because it's kind of just like, well, if things didn't happen the way they did, they'd be differently, which is like, so what? So what if the conditions were exactly as he says and things turned out differently? Even then, I think you can make the same fine-tuning argument. If we ended up in a universe that didn't have life, and of course there wouldn't be anyone around to say this, but then you could just say, well, then that universe was clearly, obviously designed to have no life in it. I mean, look at all the universe and there's no life anywhere. Then it had to be intentionally designed by that because the odds were ever so slight. So that's that type of lottery.
Yeah, it I would be amazed. And again, this is all this points to God or whatever. No, not really, because you already had said that God was all powerful. So why wouldn't God make a universe where no life could ever be supported, yet life was there anyway?
If he was omnipotent, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, well, that would be like, wow, how do we, and it's like, well, why does God just spoil?
And honestly, I think that would be more.
That would be more impressive. That not
Yes.
only that, it would point more to like a God. For whatever reason, God has to hide, but
Yes.
because God has to hide. So
Yes. But a universe that has life permitting circumstances permitting life is not that. That is woefully mundane to me. But a universe that doesn't have the circumstances to create life and life arises anyway, that is much more unusual or much more interesting to me than it's like if you did 2 + 2 and you actually got 5. That seems odd. That seems to be contradictory, and that seems to be worthy of investigation. But if you just told me 2 + 2 = 4, which is basically what he's told me, okay, and well, if you change the numbers, then it
if
would
it
get a
was
different
different,
number. So what if it did?
if we were in a different universe, then it'd be different. Oh wow! So that must mean that God made it. Oh okay, yeah, sure. What?
Yeah.
If we were in a different universe, life wouldn't be possible. I don't know that that's true, but let's just assume it's true. Okay, great. Well, this is the only universe that could ever create that life could ever be possible. Okay, and well, that must mean that there's a God. Why? Because it's so improbable that it would happen on its own, unguided, randomly. Well, what does this sound like? It sounds the same exact argument as they have for complexity and biological evolution, the creationists, isn't it?
Yes, which is really odd because they don't say this about the way God functions. Because if the universe has the conditions that it has for no particular reason, that's just wildly unlikely, and someone had to set the conditions that way. But if God has the conditions that he just has them and has always had them, so there.
Yeah.
It's like they're playing. As far as I can tell, it doesn't seem to be an honest approach to the discussion to look at God having attributes as not worthy of an explanation, but the universe having attributes or fine-tuned attributes as it must require some sort of external explanation. But I do want to keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
The number of seconds in the entire history of the universe, all the way back to the Big Bang, is about 10 to the 18th power. 10 to the 18th power seconds in the entire history of the universe. 10 followed by 18 zeros, a huge number. The number of subatomic particles in the entire known universe is said to be around 10 to the 80th power. Now, with those numbers in mind, consider the following. In order for the universe to be life permitting, the force of gravity and the weak force in the atom have to be fine-tuned to the precision of 1 part out of 10 to the 100th power. The cosmological constant that governs the accelerating expansion of the universe is fine-tuned to 1 part out of 10 to the 120th power. Here's a real eye-popper. Roger Penrose of Oxford University has estimated that the initial low entropy state of the early universe, obtaining by chance alone, is 1 chance out of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123, a number which is so incomprehensible that to call it astronomical would be a wild understatement. And the examples of fine-tuning are so diverse and so numerous that they are unlikely to disappear with any future advance of physics. The fine-tuning is here to stay and requires some sort of explanation of its existence.
But God doesn't require any explanation for his existence or any of the attributes that he has.
Yeah, it's a brute fact. Okay, I don't know if you can play it and not lose your spot on this. 12:28. We're at 29. But I thought that this clip is exact. This is what I want to say. It's said better though. Can you cue that up, or I sent it to you in email as well. So,
I can attempt to, but I would have to shift some things around.
I don't want to ruin it. If not, then
I'll probably attach it as a link after the fact.
Yeah. That's fine. But okay, so in TNG, Next Generation of Star Trek, you've got Sam Clemens, the Mark Twain, and he's talking about this scientist that wanted to put the Earth back in the center of the universe. That it must have taken God millions of years just to get the tobacco right, for people, and that's that this backwards thinking of how important and significant we are is at the root cause of our hubris. So, anyways, but he says it better, in that scene. But whatever.
Just make sure you post the link in chat
Yeah.
so then I can attach it.
Okay. Sure.
Okay.
And in the literature on this subject, there are basically three possible explanations that are put forward. One would be physical necessity, that it's due to the laws of nature. They have to have the values they do. Second would be it's just pure chance alone. The third one would be it's the product of intelligent design. Someone has designed the universe to be life permitting. The problem is that those first two alternative explanations, physical necessity and chance, are just not very plausible. There's nothing about
What'd you say?
I was like, how do you know how plausible they are? That's what happened. You can't calculate plausibility without some other things. It's the only new universe we know about. So where are you getting the probability from?
Precisely. You don't know. And I made this point in one of my first videos about the girl who compared a universe to a hut. You only understand the complexity of a hut because you know what a hut is. And the same applies to a universe. If we knew the conditions that were necessary to bring about a universe, then you would have grounds to say this. But we don't know what the recipe for a universe is. We just know we have this one. If we had a bunch of different universes and we could test how they all came about, then we would have more knowledge and insight. But all we know is ours.
For years, I've been saying, look, if the theist thinks that they have such a powerful argument in the fine tuning and all this, then create some computer simulations of different universes and show that, first do the one of our universe and show that it gets that right, just to prove that the thing works, right? And then show, hey, in all of these other simulations we've run, let's say 1,000, and all of them we got zero life at all. Demonstrate at least that your argument has some merit to it. But there is no such thing. They don't have. They just say it as if it's true, and that's it. Yeah. Okay. We're never gonna make it through. I should leave.
We're gonna try. Require
these constants and quantities to have the values they do, and the chances are so remote that they cannot be reasonably faced. So that I think the most rational explanation is intelligent design. And enough.
Just to point out, he didn't actually address why those things are not plausible. He just sort of said, well, there's nothing about the universe that makes me think that, and the chances are too implausible, so I don't believe them, which is not a valid refutation. It's just, I'm not compelled.
Yeah, and even if you're going to say intelligent, I got to say, look, it's kind of dumb, okay? Yeah, okay, look, you've got a contractor to come and, fix your house. But first they bash a hole in the wall. And you're like, why did you do that? That has nothing to do with shut up. And then they bash a hole in your floor, and they smash things with a hammer here and there. And then they're like, okay, well, now I'm gonna build the shed that you want. And they build the shed. And it works, but it's flimsy and it can fly away in the wind and it breaks eventually. And you're like, what about these holes? And like, whatever. Here's my bill. And they leave, and you're like, well, that was an intelligent designer, but he was kind of stupid the way he did it, So yeah, you've got an intelligent designer, but he's also a moron. So he's smart enough to do something, but the way that he does it is just so freaking dumb. So God is dumb. God made the universe in a stupid way. Made it to run out of energy eventually. Could have made it be a universe where where you had a indefinite energy. Why not? Could have made it where entropy isn't a thing. No, the universe will end at about a trillion some odd. With it either 1 trillion, 2 trillion, some odd trillion years, whatever it is. Will eventually die and run out of food. Didn't make humans to last that long. Uh, well, of course, humans are the only thing that matters. Well, wait a minute, why? Yeah, it's just you didn't do it really well. You could have done it way better than this, especially if your whole plan was just for life to appear on one planet. Because, well, with Christianity at least, alien life would really hurt theology of any. I think that if and when we discover life in other places, it's going to really screw with theology because
Yeah,
they're gonna
and
well, I mean, it's okay because it's not intelligent life, and God has a plan for it. And then if you found intelligent life, that would really screw theology
of
because it's like,
course,
well, Jesus didn't die for those aliens. Well, that's okay because that he's happy.
or he did, and we just didn't know it yet,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
he visited there. Yeah, sure. He also visited North America. Sure.
But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, why not?
But
You know.
the thing with intelligence goes back to the whole thing that I keep harping about definitions, where it's like intelligence as a subjective term with a subjective definition can be arbitrarily picked out of anything. So quite literally any universe, regardless of how it turns out, can just be called intelligently designed for however it turned out. If you got a universe with rabbits everywhere, then you
Mhm.
could say it was designed for that. If you had a universe with no life in it, you could say it was designed for that. If you had a universe that just had black holes in it, you could say it was designed for that. There doesn't seem to be a way to falsify this because
Yeah, I mean,
any shape of a universe could be said to be intelligent. And if that's the case, then that means it doesn't matter how the universe is structured. All these fine-tuning constants he's going on about don't matter, because if we remove those constants, could you still argue that the universe is fine-tuned? If yes, then none of these things matter. And if not, why is that one thing we remove so important to the existence of a deity? So I don't like the intelligence thing because it's just a subjective evaluation of the universe that anyone can make and just call it intelligent. And if anyone does that, I don't see how that is a valid argument for the objective reality of the world. I just see that as an argument for you think the universe looks pretty intelligently
yeah,
designed.
I'll go the other way. I'll go ahead and grant intelligence, but force it, but say fine, but you have to admit that it's a moron. I'll grant the intelligence, but it's a moronic intelligence. How about that? If you
Yeah,
can agree with that, then I'll agree that it's intelligent. If they
yeah,
don't want to agree, then no.
yeah. If you can give me an example of what an unintelligent universe looks like, and then we can compare the two to
That
tell
would be
which is
interesting.
intelligent, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that too. Okay, yeah, sure. A non-moron, and then also give me a non-moronic intelligent universe, just to show me what that would look like.
Yeah,
Okay.
A number of scientists have said this as well. For example, Paul Davies, a prominent physicist, has said, through my scientific work, I have come to believe more and more strongly that the physical universe is put together with an ingenuity so astonishing that I cannot accept it merely as a brute fact. And Robert Jastrow, who was the head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, has said that this is the most powerful evidence for the existence of God ever to come out of science. So we can summarize this first.
so I just want to address this because this is a pet peeve of mine. I don't like when people put up a random picture of a random person giving a random quote. This is not evidence. This is not a study. This is not an experiment. This is one person saying something. And you haven't even gone into the reasons as to why they say that. So I absolutely hate that. I've gotten into conversations with people about the historicity of Jesus. And instead of giving me the reasons, they say, look at all these people that agree, and they don't tell me why those people agree with the historicity of Jesus or what their reasons are or what their evidence is or what experiments they've done or anything of that nature. They just say, look at the man. Look at the man saying the things. He said the thing. Isn't that impressive? So
Yeah,
that is a massive pet peeve of mine.
it reminds me of the debate I had a while back on Modern Day Debate channel with now I can't think of his YouTube name. I want to call him Giant Eyebrows. That's not his name. But anyway, you know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. The apologist guy. And, oh, here's this person that says we don't need empirical evidence for science, or we don't need tests. Here's this other person like, I don't care. I don't care. That doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It's like, I don't know who these people are, and I don't care if they also agree with your side. That all I care about is if it's true. The philosophers don't matter. The philosophy doesn't matter. All that matters is it's true. Oh, but this
Exactly.
person agrees and this person agrees. Yeah, that's nice. And so, you look up Paul Davis, you go, okay, well, how good of a scientist is he? What things has he done? Does he have a single peer-reviewed publication that talks about God? Well, he has a
But
book.
if he did have a single peer-reviewed publication to talk about God, why aren't you showing that? Why show that? Show the evidence. Don't show him. I don't care about him. Show
Yeah, he
his
wrote a
evidence.
book called God and the New Physics, but and deals with philosophy and the nature of God, miracles, free will, time, and consciousness. So that's a book that this guy that happens to be a scientist wrote. Well, the thing about a book is it's going to get reviewed, but it's not going to get peer reviewed. And even if it does, then those peers will just say, this isn't science, and that's it. And so, yeah, you can go ahead and write your book that talks wish-wash about God, and it doesn't matter because you haven't filtered it through uh, the rigors of science. So I don't care. This is guy that happens to be. I don't know. This is the other guy you mentioned because I looked at Paul Davis.
Robert Jastrow. It's still on screen. Robert Jastrow, former head of NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies.
Okay, there he is.
If I was trying to figure out if God existed, NASA would obviously be the first place I would go.
Let's see. Let's see.
Also, greatly appreciated if and when you get the time, the links to the resources you find out about these individuals, please put them in chat.
Yeah, well, it's just whatever appears on Wiki. So I mean, he's agnostic, not a believer. It seems to him that the curtain drawn over the mystery of creation will never be raised by human efforts. So that's not a thing. That's not a scientific statement that he's making on creation. This is a philosophical statement. So these things are this guy. Where again, how much did he do? Okay, he was in NASA. He was involved in different things there. He doesn't even get a picture on Wikipedia. That sucks. Here's a quote. Now we can see how the astronomical evidence supports the biblical view of the origin of the world. Now, okay, we're done. So you know what? Whatever science you did doesn't matter because that's just not. Okay, you found somebody that is on your side. Good job. Wow. Yay. Just like the creationists go, hey, look, we have all these scientists that are on our staff that happen to agree with us. Yeah, that's nice. And we have more scientists that disagree. Now what? So, who wins? And if that's the contest, how many scientists could we quote that agree with the natural view of things, right? We could quote more. So if we quote 3, do we win? He quoted 2.
Exactly. But the other thing, and I mention this a lot, is you don't show the stats the other way around. So congratulations, you found some people who agreed with you. But what about, are there no people in NASA who disagree with you? Or were there no one else that you could cite? Are you not going to show the arguments the other way around? Or are you only going to show the side that supports what you already believe? And let's just not talk about potential objections, other perspectives, alternatives. Let's just show these people who agree with me and not talk about anybody else who might disagree with me. I think that is not necessarily deliberate, but I think that is not a genuine, helpful approach to a situation, to just talk about here's why I'm right, rather than let's look at the entirety of everything and the scope of evidence everywhere.
You couldn't load the conversation. That's not what apologetics is. Apologetics is pretending you're right. Of course, way back when, this is done a while ago by Pew Research Center, that about 41% of the scientists they polled didn't believe in God. And so 33% did, and 18 were somewhere in the middle. And who knows how they asked that question? I guess I'd have to look deeper into it. But at any rate, compared to the general public, it's about 83% believe in God, and 4% don't. So it seems to me that when you become a scientist, or if you have the mindset to be a scientist, you're less likely to have a belief in God. And so you could quote your 33% of scientists that happen to agree with you. We've got 41. I wouldn't be surprised if that number is bigger. But what's your point? Because no matter who we quote, and it wouldn't matter either. Our side, it doesn't matter how many agree with our side, if we even have a side per se. Our side is skeptical, so I guess we don't. But it doesn't matter how many scientists happen to say, well, the natural universe can be explained naturally. That doesn't make it true. So it doesn't. It's not. It's just not how logic functions. Anyways, okay.
Okay.
As follows: 1. If the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause of its beginning. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its beginning. We can summarize this second argument as follows: 1.
I'd like to point out that first argument had literally nothing to do with God.
Well, he said this before, that the Quran isn't meant to be about God anyways. It's one of multiple arguments, so you have to use a shotgun fallacy in order to get to God. You have to throw out that argument, you have to throw out like two other arguments, if not more, to get to God. And he said that's the point of the Quran. The Quran isn't to get to God by itself. It's one thing in many to get to God. It does eventually get there, but it's not meant to. So he has actually responded to that. But I'm like, yeah, but then why bother with the argument then? Well, because without that,
I've heard that response as well, but I don't see how these things clearly correlate and come together. In addition to that, I get the distinction. The way I see these arguments is that these arguments either stand or fall on their own merit. And to me, if it's like, if this argument doesn't get to God, and this argument doesn't get to God, and this argument doesn't get to God, and this argument doesn't get to God, eventually we'll get to God. Like if you add enough zeros, eventually we'll get to one. Eventually we'll get there. But I can't see how you would.
Myself going to the bank and being like, okay, so premise 1, either I have money or lobsters don't exist. Lobsters do exist, therefore I have money. Now, given that I have money, I've established that argument. They're like, what? And I'm like, oh, listen, wait, I've got more arguments here. And so I present like 10 arguments, and I'm like, okay, therefore I would like to withdraw the $10 million. Am I going to get the 10? No, I'm not.
Exactly. Like I said, I've said this.
I haven't tried it, so I don't know.
And it works, let the rest of us know, because we need that. But like I said, if the arguments don't get to God, then to me they're not really relevant to the discussion. It could just be its own premise. But even then, like I said, we've gone over the whole class.
Not even the argument. I don't even need the argument if you had actual evidence for the thing itself. But these are things that supposedly point at the thing. They're not. And it's like you can't show the thing because the thing is invisible and it can't be seen. But here's the thing that points to the thing. Okay, so is there a way to test the thing? No, there's no way to test the thing. But here's a way to point to the. Wait a minute, how are you pointing to it if you can't test it or show it? Well, you have to do this and. Anyways, yeah, I've done the KTA. I hate the KTA. I've done it. I hate it. Go on, play the rest of the stupid KTA.
Is due to either physical necessity, chance.
I hate you, Craig. No.
2. It is not due to physical necessity or chance. 3. Therefore, it is due to design.
All right, you say that.
We've already been through that, so.
The reason for believing in the existence of God is objective moral values are in the world.
Here we go.
If God does not exist, John, then it's very difficult to find any objective standard of right and wrong, good and evil. On atheism, moral.
Before he gets there,
oh God,
I have a degree with regards to philosophy, so I am quite familiar with different varieties of philosophy. No, that doesn't mean I'm right. I'm just saying that I have a bit of context. So I understand that there are a lot of different arguments for moral objectivism that have nothing to do with a God. And the way he explains it is as if he doesn't think that there are, or that those arguments are less compelling than an argument from God, which is then another point he would have to substantiate. The point is that there are a lot of different ways you could get to moral objectivism without God, and he doesn't seem to either be aware of that, doesn't seem to take that into consideration at all, as if as if theists are the only ones who argue for objective moralism, objective moralism, moral objectivism, and I only argue that from the position of their God.
Yeah.
With an aside to that, I'm not convinced that moral objectivism even makes sense as a concept. But you have a turn with.
Yeah, look, I've had this problem for ages with this. Is that they always talk about morals and like I want to say never, but I can't. They like rarely ever talk about ethics because there's a number of ethical systems out there. You've got utilitarian, you've got and then you've got DCT, divine command theory. You've got moral uh, relativism. You've got whatever. There's a list. I have a list. I don't have it on my screen. But anyways, which one are you talking about here, Craig? Because you're going to talk about morals all you want. But what ethical system are we using? If we're using utilitarian, I don't need a God. If we're using DCT, then yes, we need a God because you have to have the divine. But the problem is, we can't talk about the ethics. We have to shade. We have to ignore the ethics because it will show his hand. It would reveal the weakness of this because this is only right because God said it's right. It's only wrong because God said it's wrong. Which God? You're my God. Of course my God. It wouldn't be your God. My God says to wear hats on Sunday. My God says don't wear hats on Sunday. I guess we have to kill each other. How does that help anything? Well, one of us is actually right. Okay, but how do we figure out which one of us is right? It didn't change anything. We both believe that hat wearing is or not hat wearing is the objective moral value and duty that we ought to strive for, right? But we have no system to determine which of us is ultimately right. So all it does is put the problem of how we say X is good or bad, and it moves it back a bit, moves it back past the goal line, so that we don't. It doesn't matter. It is right. So there is a right. It doesn't matter what that right is because we can't figure that out. But at least there's a right. So Hitler was wrong. We know that because of his God. If there wasn't a God, we couldn't say Hitler's wrong. Yes, I can. I can still say it because I still think it's wrong. Well, why? Because I do. Well, that's just an opinion, so it doesn't matter. Well, look, we can play chess, and we can either play it with rules or without rules. Which way is better? Right? And well, we made the rules of chess, didn't we? Yeah, we humans came up with that. So why is it a problem that we can't make morals and treat it like chess and say you broke the rules? You're not playing chess anymore. You're not playing morals the right way. It doesn't matter. It's like, well, chess has changed over time, and the rules have changed, and there's certain variants and whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, but we all agreed to play this way, and you're not playing that way, so you don't get to play chess with the rest of us. That's the consequence.
Mm-hmm. And like I said,
objectivism, and so you have the ethics of we want to all succeed at this game of chess, and that cheating is not a viable solution. I haven't gotten around to reading your response on my rant of that yet, but but it's not. Cheating isn't a viable game to play because eventually, if everybody's cheating, then nobody's going to do the hard work at all, and then there's no one to cheat. The whole thing falls apart. So, and of course, it doesn't explain sociopaths. That's never talked about. So, whatever. It's just look, and it's an appeal to consequence. So there you go. Yeah, those are my problems with it.
Mm-hmm. My main problems, and I think I kind of addressed this in the last stream that I did, which was a badly phrased version of the moral argument. It's a bit towards the end. Well, no, it's the first video actually. And at the end of the day, I'm not convinced that this is a truth claim. I'm not convinced that we're saying anything about reality. I think we're just saying our preferences. So the person that I responded to last Sunday said something along the lines of morality is an evaluation of what ought to happen versus what does happen. And I don't know what it means to say something ought to have happened other than to say that's just your preference and you think it should have happened. So when we get down to what morality is supposed to be, I'm not convinced that if we say Batman is better than Superman or Superman is better than Batman, I'm not convinced that one of us has to be right because we're talking about evaluations and those kinds of things don't have objective truth value. So I'm not convinced that he's talking about reality as much as he's talking about himself.
That's what we have to have somewhere that you go, okay, look, fine, it's subjective that we pick the thing that we're going to base our morals on. Fine. But then it becomes objective after that because you can go, here's how to get to this goal. Here's the goal. We know the goal. The goal is, let's say, survival. Whatever, and you go, okay, well, what does survival mean? It's fighting it, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now here's the way to get there. And it's going to change. In fact, there are going to be multiple avenues to get to survival, right? So the morals can still be somewhat subjective in that way because there's going to be multiple ways to do it, but they have an objective to get to. So that's like you said, there's millions. Well, I don't know how many, but there's lots of ways to look at it and say you could look at it and say it's objective and subjective. You could say it's all objective. You could say it's all subjective, and it's probably just word games at that point. Does it really matter? And does any of it at all point to God? No, it doesn't, because whether morals are objective or not, we could have still made them. And so I just don't see that again, the lack of association causation. So let's say it's absolutely true that it's wrong to microwave a cat for 4 minutes. 3 minutes, that's fine. 5 minutes is okay, but 4 minutes is wrong. Okay, that's the truth. Why? Because that's the nature of the universe. It's like, okay, what happens if I microwave a cat for 4 minutes? The universe explodes. Okay, well, why don't I want that to happen? Because you explode. Okay, well, do I appreciate my own existence? Yes, I do. So I don't want to. I don't want to. Okay, so it's really bad idea. Ask somebody out there to microwave a cat for 2 months, see what it does. If the universe explodes, I want to just say it's not my fault. Anyways, whatever. But it doesn't point to God. Whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, I
conclusion: microwave a cat for 4 minutes.
No, you microwave it for 5 minutes because you want the universe to explode.
No, that's if you want it to explode in 4 minutes. 5 minutes is fine.
Oh, okay. Okay, I got it mixed up. Then we go for 4.
Look, you went too far. Now you just made another universe.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue.
Values are just byproducts of biological evolution and social conditioning.
Oh, no.
Who's an atheistic philosopher of science from Canada, has said that morality is a biological adaptation. Ethics is illusory. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory. On a naturalistic, theistic view, then, there really are no objective moral values and duties in the world. But the difficulty is that in moral experience, we find a realm of objective moral values and duties that force themselves upon us as objectively binding and true. Even Roos himself, in another place, admits the man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5.
To him.
The question is, what then is the best foundation for these objective moral values?
So all he's effectively said is, yeah, it doesn't seem that way, but we feel like we're objectively right. So we have to come up with an explanation for why we feel like we're objectively right. He says he's objectively right. So now we have to come up with an explanation for why we're objectively right, because we feel like we're objectively right, so we are objectively right.
And here's the even deeper problem. Fine, I'll grant all of that. I'll grant it tentatively. Okay, Craig. Where in the Bible does it say not to rape little kids? It's not in there. It's not in there. Doesn't say you can't.
Mhm.
So it doesn't say you can, but it doesn't say you can't.
Mhm.
So
I don't.
it doesn't
William,
tell you the age of consent either, Craig.
yes.
So we're on our own. Even if everything you're saying is true, you're still on your own for many morals. And the Bible doesn't talk about modern problems that we have. Should we or shouldn't we mess with genetics? We could maybe manipulate genetics to a degree where we don't die anymore. How about that for something? And not only do you not die, if we get it right, we also stop aging. Not only stop aging, but reverse it until we're an age that we want to be. So you can be 18 for as long as you want. That sounds pretty good to me. So is that okay? The Bible doesn't say anything about it, Craig. So what do we do with that? We're on our own. Your point, whatever it is not relevant.
And it seems like, if, because at least for the sake of the presentation, he's not really arguing from that biblical perspective. But I tend to find that William Lane Craig doesn't necessarily do that. And I find that a little bit odd, in the sense that when he's making these arguments, they have nothing to do with the Bible, which then begs the question of why he's a Christian if all of his reasons are absent Christianity. But that's a side point.
It feels like it's wrong to do this, therefore it has to be from God. Okay.
Or it feels like it's wrong to do this, or it feels like it's objectively wrong to do this, therefore it is objectively wrong to do this, and we need an explanation for that, therefore God. At least that seems to be the line of reasoning.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think the answer is in God. If God
there we
exists,
go.
then we have a transcendent, objective foundation for right and wrong, for good and evil, that atheism cannot supply.
Because God said so. How is that any more objective than anyone else's evaluation? How is that any more objective than what you were talking about in terms of the mutual agreement of the rules of a society or the rules of a game? How is that any more transcendently objective, whatever that means? How is that any more objective than you and me agreeing on something, and then within that framework we can objectively determine what benefits our values and what mitigates our values?
Like I said, we just set the goalpost back a bit, because now, instead of arguing, because humans have fought and died for these things for ever, and we're probably going to keep doing it. We have this political climate that's a whole other video, that's going on. And it's like, some people think this is right, some people think that is right, and we're fighting over it. We're fighting over it intellectually, thankfully, although there are some people that are fighting physically for it, and we hopefully object to the physical, because that's not good. The intellectual is preferred, because then nobody dies, hopefully. I don't know of anyone that's died from an intellectual debate, but maybe it exists. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, instead of saying, well, I like, hats, we should wear them on Sunday, you say, no, we shouldn't. Okay, let's figure this out. Can we get to an answer in election? And if at the end of the day we go, you know what? We can't. We can't. So maybe we should be skeptical that it's a thing at all, and you wear your hat and I won't, and I won't care that you're wearing a hat. How about that? I let you be, because it's not really, it doesn't affect me. So therefore I'm not going to care about it. And that's that. And that will be true on some things, and it won't be true on other things, and it just depends. Uh-oh. Am I still here?
Yep.
Okay. Just depends on what the thing is. Anyways, okay.
Yep.
It's complicated.
Exactly.
You can summarize this third argument as follows. 1. If God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. 2. But
1 is unsubstantiated.
Objective moral values and duties do exist.
2 is unsubstantiated.
From which it follows logically and necessarily that 3, therefore, God exists.
All right, I want to reductio ad absurdum this here. So if law doesn't exist, the lobster original deity, then it's really bad that that's the case, and we don't want it to be really bad that that's the case. Therefore, he does exist. Okay, that's it. That's all you're saying. That's it. Not not.
Yep, the structure of the argument is such that you could swap out the word God for literally anything else, and it functions exactly the
Pancake.
same.
Pancake. Pancake
Yep.
doesn't exist. Therefore, if pancake does exist, then something terrible and bad, which is that's what premise two is an appeal to consequence.
Yeah. So I actually unfortunately I am going to have to end
Yeah,
soon
we're
because
gonna have to end this. It's my fault. I blame me.
nope, nope, it's okay. It's okay. We had good conversations come out of it, and that was the goal.
All
I
right.
just want to try to keep them around 2 hours ish. But there was one more thing I wanted to say. I have had conversations with a friend of mine regarding this subject, and they say a similar thing where if morality isn't objective, then everyone's making up their own rules and they're just doing whatever they want, and that's bad. And I don't agree necessarily, but I say for the sake of argument that I agree that that is in fact bad. Bad and inaccurate are not the same thing. And it seems apparent to me that even if there is an objective moral law, regardless of whether there's a God who created it or not, even if there's an objective moral law, people still do whatever they want. They can choose to follow the law or not choose to follow the law in the same way they can choose to follow anybody else's minor suggestion. So it doesn't really have an effect on reality, except it's just mildly suggesting that we do some things and not do other things. And then it tells different people in different places of the world to do different things. So that's also fun and neat.
Yeah,
So
it is a problem where whether there's an objective morals or not, like I said, first identifying them as like that's up to us anyways. It seems like a lot of them. Maybe some of them you could say, okay, it says don't kill in the Bible. Okay, well, it says don't murder. Well, which is it? Well, depends what translation, you know.
mhm.
So you're still on your own to some degree, and that is an issue that we are going to have to sit down and figure out. How do we collectively, and I as an individual, conduct myself in a way that I can cooperate with everybody, but also recognize something that is not uh, when it's a good idea to not cooperate anymore. Like, the Nazis are at your door and asking if you're hiding the person. It's time to lie, regardless of how much importance I think the truth is. It's time to lie. It's time to be deceptive and say, well, I think they're over there somewhere. I thought they would go that way. They
Yes.
won't
And I've
lie.
made this, I was going to say, I made this point in my stream last week. If it was objectively morally the case that it is morally good for you to stab your neighbor every Sunday, I strongly doubt that you would stab your neighbor every Sunday if
It
that
depends
goes
if I
against your
like my
values.
neighbor or not, though. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah. But if that goes against your values, if you value
yeah,
not hurting people, I strongly doubt that you will just throw away your values because objective moral says so. And most people seem to function that way. Even if they have different values, everyone seems to have whatever duties or things they do are based to maximize their values or minimize other things that would minimize their values.
mm.
Strongly
we
doubt
also
that all of a sudden you're going to uproot everything you think is true because you found out it was objectively morally true to stab your neighbor. It's like, well, I don't
yeah.
like this and I
Well,
wouldn't usually do this, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
yeah, there's that saying like every man has his price. It's like, well, that might be true. I hope it's not for me myself, but ultimately, unless I was actually presented that scenario where I'm actually being offered $1 million or whatever the bleep it is to
Mhm.
do this thing that I would normally not do, it's like I would say because right now, no, it's easy to say no because I'm not there. But if I was there, what would I say? Hopefully no. But who knows? Who knows what would happen? And it's not. And so the way that I want to be, that is my morals and ethics. The way that I am, well, we'll see. And hopefully I'll stick with what I try to hold to. And if I don't, well then I can only really blame myself and feel bad and guilty and try to fix myself and not do that again. I guess and it's really, you get one shot to do the right thing if there is a right thing to do, and you do your best. And when you fail yourself, that's maybe what it is to break morals, and then that is something you have to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think that we can speak in absolutes of what we would do in the future, but I don't think that that's relevant. I think all we can do is speak about how we feel now and just work based off of that.
I'll
And
tell you
we'll
one thing.
get there when we get there. All we can do is, talk about how we evaluate what maximizes and what minimizes our moral our values now. And whatever decisions we think we might make in the future, we will only know when we get to it.
Yeah.
There was one thing. I know one person is still here. I think it is Main Gun, and I wanted to acknowledge his thing in the chat just before we went.
Hey!
He said, "Don't question him. He got a PhD. Totally not an argument from authority. Absolutely not. Makes perfect sense to me. Sounds about right.
Okay, this is objectively correct.
Yep,
And it is your moral duty to subscribe to Skeptic Skeleton. If you don't, not only is there no God, but you don't exist. I know that's weird, but it's true. So if you exist, you have to subscribe.
that's the only option. That
That's it.
must
There
be
is
the
no
case.
other option. That's it. This don't analyze this argument. This is coming from two skeptics. We know what we're talking about, right?
Yes, we're skeptical on a daily basis. We
Except
have
for
all the answers.
this one we're not. We know that it's objectively correct to subscribe to Skeptic Skeleton.
You are very welcome, Main Gun 07. You're very welcome.
Okay, good night, sir. Glad I was able to join something with you earlier. I was asleep. Anyways, bye everybody. Be logical. Hi, main gun. Bye, main gun. Go comment on my video. Nobody cares about Legend of Zelda except for me.
Go watch Deconverted Man's video on Zelda.
Nobody cares.
Please do and comment something. Even if you just say hi, just say hi. Just
Say hi. It's objectively true. Morals lost.
it's objectively moral that you go watch the video.
Already. I don't know when to shut up.
Well, we will see you all on the next stream next week, and I promise we will actually get through the video next time.
Oh, yeah, I won't show up. That will help. All right, later.
All right, later, everyone. Bye.